All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I do have a request so that we're a small group and we can talk a little better. Can we all move a little bit forward, just a little? I don't, hold on, so I'm not overpowering you. I don't insist that you sit right up here with everybody. I know that makes some of us uncomfortable. It's okay. You're good, ladies. Thank you. I can read the look on your face. And that is said in the absolute best humor. Okay, you're close enough. We can make this work. I have a big mouth and I'm on a mic, so I'm sure you can hear me. Come on in. Oop, back up. So, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about empowering each other to deliver the gospel. That's not always an easy thing for us, is it? You ever stop and think about that? The one thing that we should be doing the best is sometimes letting each other actually do it is an issue. So we talked about this morning that what our mission is. Matthew 28:19, right? Ellen White wrote that our church is God's appointed agency for the salvation of men. We're in a less formal setting, so I might be a little more direct today, but I want to talk real. I want to talk about how do we do this the best we possibly can? How do we reach people with Christ, for Christ? It's our mission to carry the gospel to the world. From the beginning, it's been God's plan that through his church shall be reflected to the world his sufficiency, members of the church who he has called out of darkness into his marvelous light are to show forth his glory. That's what the world needs to see from us, God's glory. The church is the repository of riches of the grace of Christ, and through the church will eventually be made manifest, even to the principalities and power in heavenly places, the final and full display of the love of God. We got Jesus declared, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. So this is our vertical love. This is from us to him. Next, and the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. That's our horizontal love. Here's the one I hear people talk about the least. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Everything hangs on this. Love equals understanding. Remember what I said in the message today? Jesus was absolutely brilliant at meeting us where we were. Whoever it was, the woman at the well, the leper, the crazy guy with the pigs. You know what I'm talking about, right? He was brilliant at this. Now, of course, he's the Son of God, but the truth is we can be better about figuring out how to meet people where they are, not where I am. How many generations is y'all's family of Adventists now? This is my family, by the way. This is my mom, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my son, and my wife. So I'm driving up Interstate 95. Stace and I are dating. We're in West Palm Beach. We used to live down here. And somehow we got to talking about religion. That hadn't come up yet. And she asked me, well, what I believe. I said, well, I grew up Southern Baptist. Well, my dad was Catholic. My mom is Southern Baptist. My first wife was Lutheran, so I figured I'm pretty all messed up by this time. And she says, well, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. What is that? That's exactly what I said. What is a Seventh-day Adventist? I never even heard of it. And she started explaining it to me, and I'm like, oh gosh, y'all are out of your minds. You see where I'm standing today, right? I don't need to tell you that whole story that you understand the outcome. I actually entered into study to try to prove it was all malarkey. And I don't know. Well, Stacey and I have been married for 25 years this year, so something happened right along that way, right? All right. Oh, hold on. Let me get back to this. So my assertion for you is I think people are aliens. We're all aliens. I'm going to prove it. You remember watch the Jetsons cartoon as a kid? Favorite cartoon?
We're in those kind of bubble cars now that we see.
Oh, you are a woman after my heart. Because we're going to talk about just this. So for us as children, and we watched the Jetsons, it was in the far distant future that we would never see. Was it not? Okay. In the storyline of the Jetsons, George Jetson was born July 31st of 2022. He is a toddler right now. Is it? Why? Oh no, that's not my. This was the Facebook meme that was flying around. I just took a screenshot of it. This was flying around last year on Facebook all over the place, and everybody was talking about George Jetson is going to be born this month. And now he's a toddler. Okay, so we're now in the storyline of the Jetsons. We are. Do you understand that every single piece of technology that was in the Jetsons cartoon, with the exception of flying dog houses, I hadn't found that one yet, every single thing exists now. Everything does. And I can prove it. Do we have video communication? We absolutely do. We have Zoom and FaceTime and smartwatches and all kinds of things. We also have robotic vacuum cleaners. Right. They even have robotic housekeepers. I found a company that manufactures those. Weirdest thing I've ever read in my life. We have smartwatches. If you're old enough, you remember, what was it? Dick Tracy was the only person on the planet that had that watch that you could talk to people in, right? Knight Rider. And we also have flying cars. I've got an aerial shot of a flying car in Europe parked in a guy's driveway. It's just, wow. But look at this. Look at the date. Oh, hold on. Look at the date on this. It's just this month. The FAA has approved the first flying car in the United States of America. Sorry, I backed up too many times. I got overzealous on the button. All right. So this young lady here on the left is my granddaughter, Chandler. And she's probably displaying for you losing her first two teeth. And then what we have going on over here on the right is FaceTime, right? Well, this is how my wife and I stay in touch. We FaceTime with Chandler. Now, she's grown considerably since this picture was taken. But they live in Fairview, Montana. You have to drive anywhere to get to anything. I think the nearest Costco is like 3 hours. So they're in the car all the time, right? Well, when my daughter would get in the car and they're driving, she would call me a lot just to talk. And Chandler would always say, Grandpa, Grandpa, where are you? I can't see you. She will never know a time before video phone. Ever. It made no sense to her that she couldn't see me talking. Now, most of us didn't grow up that way, right? How many grew up with a house phone? Right? With the long pigtail cord that if you wanted to talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend and you stretched it all the way down the hall and tried to go into the laundry room or whatever and talk, and then mom was yelling at you because you were blocking the hallway. The struggle was real, wasn't it? So it's interesting that when you put it in perspective, Chandler will never know anything other than FaceTime as the norm of communication. And what's that?
And what follows for her, that's going to be the long cord stretched to the laundry room. By the time she's my age, who knows what will exist?
Yes, absolutely. Daniel 4:3, how great are his signs and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. No, it doesn't. But this does. From generation to generation is where the change happens. The biggest thing that I have come to understand is our truth never changes, ever. God is God, but we're not. And how we communicate his word totally changes all the time. And it's not going to stop. And the world is changing. We'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, so I want each of you to pretend that you live on another planet. No one lives on Earth. Earth is not populated. And everybody that lives on your planet is about within the same 10 to 15 year age range of you. Okay? You were born in more or less the same time frame. And you're going to live there, and you're going to grow up, and you're going to share experiences and stuff, right? You're going to go see movies and listen to music, go to church, study your Bible. You're going to have all of these things happen in your world with your world's people. But while that's happening for you, there's 6 other planets. And on 6 other planets, there's 6 other age groups going through the exact same experience, not exact same experiences, but they're growing up and they're learning and they're going to school and they're going to see movies and they're going to hear music and they're going to study their Bible and go to church and so on. What is the likelihood that on 7 completely different planets that is an exact same experience for all 7 groups? It's never going to happen. It's going to be different from everybody. This is exactly how a generation works. Exactly. Because the world I grew up in is gone. I was born in 1964. The world I grew up in is gone, and it will never be again. My kids, we have 5, have no perspective of what my world was like because they weren't there to see it. And in fairness to them, I'm an adult now. I don't see the world that they're growing up in. They're all adults, by the way. We have 3 grandchildren now. But you get my point, right? I can't see through that lens that they do. Their world is different from mine. They're on another planet. And this concept is so close to literal truth it's not funny if you really think about it for a minute. Okay, now here's what's going to happen next. So a big mothership's going to come around and it's going to pick us all up, all 7 planets, And they're going to take us to earth and drop us all off together. Now, we have to get along. We have to share values. We have to go to church together. We have to have elections together. We have to listen to music together, and movies and entertainment and everything that comes with human beings. Now all 7 planets are going to get together and do it together. Wow, how likely is this going to work? It's not going to work well, is it? Because here's how this usually works out. I'm really sad we don't have any young people in here. This is a great conversation for young people. Young people are usually accused of being the alien invaders who are coming in to destroy everything. Come on, older folks, you know we talk about them exactly this way. Yeah, we do. They're coming to destroy everything that means anything.
Because it's true.
Ah, well, hold on. Older folks, we're dinosaurs. And all we want to do is come in and tear down everything that's new and take it back to the way it used to be. And that's true too.
I just want Fort Myers to go back the way it used to be. Nothing else.
No, I get it. Trust me, I really feel strongly that I thought the world I grew up in was pretty cool. I liked being a kid. I would pay much to go back to being a kid. But the sad reality is that's gone now, right? Can't happen. All right. And you know this is how we more or less talk about young versus old, right? Okay, so read this quote, please. It says, "I see no hope for the future of our people if they are dependent on the frivolous youth of today. For certainly all youth are reckless beyond words. When I was young, we were taught to be discreet and respectful of elders, but the present youth are exceedingly disrespectful and impatient of restraint." Somebody tell me, what generation are we talking about? What'd you say, Pastor?
100 years ago.
Okay. Hesiod. Folks, this discussion has been happening since Adam and Eve, basically. There's nothing new under the sun here. We've been fighting this same fight over and over and over again. When I read that, I'm like, well, gosh, man, that's a baby boomer talking about millennials. I promise you this. And then I read at the bottom of the quote from, I'm like, wow, okay. Here's the thing. All these generations, there's nothing right or wrong about any of them. They're just different.
There's lots right and wrong about all of them.
I was getting to that. You think my wife has sat in on one of these talks before? No.
Just that statement.
There's nothing wrong or right with any generation, and there's everything wrong and right with every generation.
Yes.
Here's the truth. Never say never, never say always. Because there is none of those things except with God. On humans, we're all broken. Even those in the church, we're still broken. I always look at people when they say stuff, I'm like, do you understand the same broken, messed up people out there are the same broken, messed up people that are in here?
Amen.
We got to stop and consider that for a minute.
What's the difference?
What do you mean, what's the difference? The difference is Christ.
Well, no, but I mean, why aren't we out there?
That's an excellent question. Why aren't we out there?
We're broken.
Because we're broken.
Because we know we're broken.
Yes. And we're trying to.
And we don't want to.
That's right. But I think the key in this is the realization that even though we're still here, we're still broken. We're still fighting all the same fights that all the people out in the world are fighting.
But with help.
But with help and hope. That's the thing we have, is hope. Folks, our world needs hope. I'll get all emotional when you're talking about that. Our world needs hope, and we have it to give them.
Amen.
But we've got to do it in a way that they get it, not the way we get it. It was easier for Stace to explain Seventh-day Adventism to me because she grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist. She's a product of Adventist schools. Me, I'm not. And there's nothing wrong with either one of us. It took me a couple of years to get my head right. Look, she spent months getting me ready to meet her parents. That's a true story. And they know it too. And I had to have a long talk with my mom about an Adventist too, because we weren't Adventists. And okay, Mom, you know, vegetarians. What do you mean you worship on Saturday? What do you mean you can't eat shrimp? And no bacon? My God, are you out of your mind? You get it, right? This is from Evangelism, page 296. Ellen White said, "We must not think we have all the truth, that we understand the main pillars of our faith, and we may rest on this knowledge. The truth is an advancing truth, and we must walk within the increasing light." Again, hang on to this. The truth doesn't change, but how we talk about it has to always change. And not only does it change from generation to generation, it changes from person to person. Yes, ma'am.
Does that mean that the truth, does that mean that our understanding of the truth continues to grow? That the truth remains the same, but our understanding of it?
I think so.
I mean,
I
look at that verse and sometimes it's like, oh, new truth. New truth has come to light. It's not new truth. The truth is the truth. God is the same yesterday, today, and always. But maybe our discussion of it and our understanding of it and the Holy Spirit revealing how we should interpret things changes, because we've seen that over history.
Yeah, and I'm going to qualify what I'm getting ready to say as just what it means to me, so I'm not laying this on anybody else. But I think this is where we're talking about how church services change and music in church services change and how we worship style changes and things like that. My guess is the church of 60 years ago probably doesn't look much like the church now, but the church of 60 years ago probably didn't look much like the church of 60 years before it.
Well, yeah, and also the truth has the same foundation, so
Yes.
it's just more manifestation. Or it's like, like a truth is like, if it's like a seed, then the more it grows, the more you see, but it still comes from the same source.
Well, that's beautiful, Pastor. Thank
So,
you.
I think when we talk to people, I always tell them, all the truth that we believe is right there in Genesis. I mean, it's the seed of all the things that we believe as Adventists is right there in the first few chapters of the Bible, and it's just an expansion of that understanding that we get. And then, spirit of prophecy is just an expansion of the truth that already existed. So it's not like a new truth. I think that's maybe what you were saying, is like the truth is new in the sense of maybe a deeper understanding or an expanded understanding, but it doesn't like become a different seed. Jesus said it's
Exactly.
you know the fruit by the tree that it comes from. So
Yes.
I think and some people that argue that, well, no, there's another seed of truth out there that's separate. That's where I think you can get into postmodernism, and it becomes a real, relativism becomes, an issue.
I fully agree with that. That was thank you, Pastor. It's always great to have a pastor in the room.
And that's such a relevant conversation right now.
Because some of these biblical questions, you're way more qualified to answer than I am. I absolutely agree with that. I think your point about the same seed, and then as the tree grows, you can see higher. I think that's a beautiful analogy. And I may steal that from you with your permission. And I'm shameless about that. If it's good, really don't care where it came from. All right, so let's talk about generations in the United States. Since the Puritans arrived in 1584, there's been about 20, 21 generations. This is actually a science. I can take generational science all the way back to King Arthur. And we've got a definition of all of that. It's pretty cool for me to be able to live in this space all the time. I get to study this all the time. And it's fascinating. And it's fascinating how it plays out. I can't take you through everything involved, but we can touch on it today. So we got right now 6 major generations in the church. We still have a couple of GI generation, that's the World War II. Still have a few of them around. They're in their upper 90s. Silent generation, 1928 to 1945. I know my mom is a silent generation person. Anybody else silent gen? Okay. We got baby boomers. Because every generation thinks their generation is the best. 1946 to 1964. Boomers? I'm actually a boomer. But I have to say I was born in 64, the very last year. And I grew up with a bunch of Gen Xers. So I identify with Gen X considerably more than I do with boomers. I have a couple of boomer things. I think my wife would let you know. And I'm an equal... what's that?
You're bilingual.
I'm bilingual. Love it. Great.
You can speak both languages.
Pastor Travers, you just need to hang with me. I like this. And there's exceptions to this. So some of these things we'll talk about today may not be you. You may have grown up in one generation and not identify with the one you were born into at all. This particularly happens in rural areas. I call it the time machine effect. It's not literal time, but figurative time moves a little bit differently in small towns and stuff like out where we live. And you probably are likely to identify with the previous generation more than you do your own. So this is people science. And what is exact about people? Nothing. Absolutely nothing is exact about people. All right, we got Gen X, 1965 to 1980. We got Xers in here? Awesome. I love Gen X. So if I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth if I claim both generations, y'all, okay? Millennials, 1981 to 1996. Do we have any millennials? Justin is a millennial. Well, I would have told the millennials that were being here, there will be no millennial bashing in here today. Then we have Gen Z, who is from 1997 to, what's their cutoff year, 2011. I do this all the time, and I have this mental block about remembering the years. Then you got a bunch of, so in the church, I'm not counting Alpha yet. In the church, these are our dominant generations that are active in leadership and participation in things. And then you got Gen Alpha, where are you? 2012. And finally, they've set an end to it to 2025. So next year, we're starting another generation, which nobody has identified yet. They were going to call, somebody proposed, what's that?
You're not going to call them betas?
Probably. There was a proposal made to call Generation Alpha Generation C for COVID. And when I read this, I'm like, are you out of your mind? Really? Why are you going to saddle an entire generation with that? I think COVID would very much be a defining thing for Gen Z. That's going to be a big deal for them, probably more than anybody. Why? Because of the impact it had on, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but you think that Gen Z missed high school graduations, starting college, high school football championships, prom. Those are coming of age things for most Americans that they didn't, many of them didn't get to do. And so the impact on them is going to be, and that's those formative years for us in development. And come on, everybody identifies with high school. Very much so. Yes, ma'am.
And I feel like they felt the change the most. the younger generation, COVID is going to seem like it was a normal thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like like remote work and homeschool and wearing a mask and using hand sanitizer and having it stacked everywhere you go so you can quickly grab it and use it. This is normal for them. They're so young that it's part of their formative
That's right.
childhood.
That's absolutely right. And I can offer some proof to that happens. Think about news reports that you saw from China and from Hong Kong and places before COVID, and you always saw somebody coming off the subway in that news reel wearing a mask. They've been doing that for years. That's a normal thing for them. And it's normal for us now because we haven't been wearing masks, and yet you still go to church and there's somebody sitting in church wearing a mask. Hey, go for it. No problem with it. It's the new norm. But so she's right. To Gen Z, there's never been a time before that. Especially that hit you in your formative years. Oh, and for Gen Alpha. All right, so I got a point to make here. I want you to look at the birth years. Do you understand that how many years from the beginning of the silent generation to the end of Gen Alpha?
Too fast.
Yeah. How many and how much changed? I mean, Mom, I tell this story about my mom, but my mom grew up on a farm. She grew up on a post-Depression era farm. They plowed fields with mules.
Depression days.
Yeah, for real. And she's done that. Most of us have no point of reference of what that is even remotely like. All right, so somebody tell me from your generation, Pastor, if you don't mind, tell me an iconic historical event from your generation.
It's definitely 9/11.
9/11. How about you, sir? Same? Ma'am? Doesn't matter what it is, it has a meaning to you. I'll come back. How about you? Diana's wedding. Excellent. Yes, sir.
The polio epidemic.
Polio epidemic. Excellent.
Horrible epidemic.
Murder of John F. Kennedy. Internet.
I would say COVID-19.
COVID-19. How about Martin Luther King? How about landing on the moon? How about the Vietnam War? How about Desert Storm 1 and so on? You see my point here. If you go around the room and ask, you'll have a few people that identify with the same one, but it's usually different. What about iconic technology? So somebody said the internet. Yes. Cell phones.
iPhone.
Did you have one, ma'am?
I said telephone.
Telephone, absolutely. You understand fire was technology, right? At one point. We don't consider it that, but it is technology. Tesla. Love it.
I remember black and white TV.
Black and white TV. I remember black and white TV. And the test pattern that came on and the little commercial right before they played the national anthem that said, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?" I'm old enough to remember that. Yes, ma'am.
My grandparents got a rolling dishwasher, and it rolled over in the corner when they weren't using it, and it rolled up to the sink and plugged up with hoses.
I remember those.
And it was like the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my entire life.
I'll tell you what mine was. Pong. The video game. Because nobody had ever seen a video game. And now you could play table tennis on your TV. And I begged Mom for months to get me one of these. And she surprised me at Christmas and actually got me one. And so there's all these neighborhood kids watching this little blip go boom, boom, boom. And everybody's going, "Oh, wow, check that out." That was mind-blowing Star Wars technology for the time. All these things were, right? All right. So we got 5 to 6 generations, arguably, right? Now think about this. I'm only counting into Gen Z right now. It's 93 years. How much has the world changed in 93 years? How much has the world changed since 2020? How much has the world changed since last year? We're registering flying cars in American airspace now. AI. Chat GPT, yes. It's crazy. So what is a generation? It's a body of individuals who are born in approximately the same time period who share similar beliefs and attitudes. Here's the magic in this. We discuss it in years, and that's correct. But similar behaviors and attitudes is the magic formula of that. Because you'll find somebody like me, I'm called a cusper. I'm born on the edge of 2 generations. I'm bilingual. And I do have some things that I identify with from my predecessors. I identify more with 70s music than all of my Gen X friends do. For example, they identify with 80s music. That's the difference. But if you go talk movies or entertainment or Pong or anything like that, all of my Gen X friends totally identify with that. Similar behaviors and attitudes. So this is why I feel like I'm an Xer, even though technically I'm a boomer. All right, let's talk about Silent Gen for a minute. I do a 10-week long series on this that we do a deep dive on every single generation that I'm going to give to you in about 45 minutes. So I'm... All right, well, let's do it. So these are some iconic Silent Gen people. You may recognize a few of them. I don't put their pictures up there for any controversy other than they're just iconic people from that generation. And I went looking for a scripture that I felt fit every generation the best. So for this one, Psalm 71:18, even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, O God, till I declare your power to the next generation and your might to all who are to come. I think we can totally credit our Silent Gen folks for that. They set a lot of standards in place that we observe today and the generations before them. Silent generation was the generation that was taught that children are meant to be seen and not heard.
That's what you were taught. That sounds like your mother told you that, didn't she?
Well, they also learn from McCarthyism that it was a good idea to keep your mouth shut, right? If you understand the significance of history when Joseph McCarthy is accusing half the country of being communists and everybody was terrified of that. It's called the Second Red Scare. Google it. If you wanted to maintain that career and that good job that you had, especially if you work for government, you better be quiet. And a lot of silent generation people are not comfortable voicing their opinions about politics and things like that. They don't do it. And even Richard Nixon called them the silent majority. I won't get into politics, but I heard another politician this past week is trying to tap into this about the silent majority. All right, so they're 78 to 94. They have very traditional values. They tend to. Mom is the one representative for your generation. You can tell me if this is correct. Silents believe the greater good outweigh the individual need. They are resistant to change. You know why? It isn't because they're hard-headed and they won't change anything. It's because if you were a child born during the Great Depression and then you witnessed World War II and then you witnessed Vietnam and so on down the road, all change equals bad. I would totally think that. I believe I would. We don't talk about that. Have you ever been told that by an older American? No, we don't talk about that. I have a pastor friend. He preached a sermon about how he was struggling with how to discipline one of his kids. And a member of his congregation came up and told him after the service, Pastor, we don't talk about that. And he was thinking, oh, this is a great sermon. The struggle's real. You got kids. Yeah, and I said they don't express their opinions in public. They tend not to. I call silent generation the either or generation. They're very, very, it's good or evil, it's black or white, it's this or that. There's nothing gray in there, it's this thing or that thing. Period. And we live in a very gray world right now. All right, impacts on silence, the Great Depression. Even if you were a young child, that had impacts that went on for years. You know, when has there been another time in American history that 25% of the entire population of the country was out of work? World War II. The second Red Scare I mentioned with Joseph McCarthy. That was a big thing. They had a committee for American behavior in Congress. Yeah. Google this, it's true. I'm sorry, Ron. The Korean War. Civil rights movement. Let's face it, you look at the civil rights movement alone, not even stirring in Vietnam or anything like that, the 60s were very turbulent years in the United States. So, and they're the smallest generation in history. Children of crisis, they're the first generation that were mostly born in hospitals. They ended up being the wealthiest generation of seniors we've seen so far. Now, younger silence and early boomers had the highest divorce rates in history. This is going to come up later. They also had the lowest crime, suicide, and teen pregnancy, which, for the record, Gen Z shares teen pregnancy with that. They have the lowest ones now. Interesting. Fortune magazine called them taking no chances in 1949. Time called them the silent generation in 1951. They tend to not distrust, they have a distrust of the future and technology, because remember, all the change that they've seen is bad. World War II, the nuclear age. They play by the rules. And they believe you should too. What do you think, Mom? Did I call that right? I don't get my mom in these too much. It's cool to be able to refer to that. All right, so let's dive into boomers for a minute. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1964. This is the single largest generation in history. There were 10 million babies born per year between 1954 and 1964. Sorry. Oh, that's a lot of babies. I remember this in school. You had 2 or 3 kids crammed to a desk. We weren't prepared for this. There wasn't enough room in college, and everything became hugely competitive. I think that baby boom scripture is 1 Corinthians 14:40. Let all things be done decently and in order. But boomers, I get to pick on you a little bit, and I pick on all the generations, by the way. Everybody gets equal standing there. As young people, boomers rebelled against everything, and then grew up to become the establishment that they rebelled against. And you're nodding your head. Did I call that right? Absolutely. I think you realize your parents had some sense after all, right? So boomers are 59 to 77 right now. And you've got a weird thing going on economically with boomers. Half of them are retiring in record numbers, and the other half will not. And some economists are scared of this because a lot of boomer-owned businesses, they have no exit strategy. None. What happens when they die? What happens when they can medically no longer work? And somebody gave me a representation of just how many jobs that represented nationwide, and it's big. It is big. Well, think about this. If the boomer generation was the largest generation in history, everything in the United States of America wrapped itself around their generation because that's who the people were. Right? Google members of Congress by generation. Vast majority are baby boomers. It's still a boomer world right now. And in the church. Absolutely. Everything's wrapped around them. Boomers grew up in dominantly two-parent homes. We don't have that anymore. Huge consumers of goods and services. As boomers start to pass on, there's concern about what happens economically in the U.S. because they're followed by the second smallest generation, Gen X. Boomers tend to be workaholics. And what you do is who you are. Well, and thank you for being my discussion points. I appreciate that. But what's the conversation like? What do you do for a living? First thing you're always asked, what you do is who you are. Is that not correct?
That's it.
He's a business owner.
He's a business owner. What you do is who you are. That's your identity. But you go talk to some...
No, for us, he's our shepherd here. He's our head elder.
And for the record, folks, nothing in this discussion today is designed to be offensive at all. And if I accidentally offend you, please, I'll profusely apologize and do whatever I can to make it right. I'm talking about who we are as real people. And let's dial down to that because that's a key to understanding how do we connect with secular people outside the church. Having a good understanding about who they are and who we are is a real great place to start that conversation. Because when we fight about stuff, and we fight about a lot in America, right? We don't understand each other. It's like that 6 and 9 I described. It's usually there's two people looking at a 6 and 9 on the pavement, and they're standing on the wrong ends of it, and they're both right.
And both wrong.
And they're both wrong. And you just got to try to filter through all of this stuff to get to the heart of that. We're really good at that. And I'm not going to say that the problems don't exist. They absolutely do. I'm just saying that a lot of times, and the older I get, the more it looks like this to me. It depends on where you're standing. All right. Boomers, highest divorce rates in history. Remember I said younger silence, the boomers, which is a big part of Gen X story. And we'll get into that. And I always called boomers, their customer is always right generation. I am sent a copy of every customer complaint that comes into my company. We have over 250,000 customers, and I look at every single complaint. And this isn't all about me, but I see trends. I'm convinced I can tell you what generation they're from based on how they word their complaint. I'm convinced of it. Because we tend to behave certain ways, right? All right, impacts on boomers. Moon landing. Martin Luther King. Go around and ask somebody where they were when baby boomer, where they were when Martin Luther King was assassinated. Every single person will tell you exactly where they were standing and what they were doing. Same for John F. Kennedy. Those two assassinations are big, huge parts of boomer identity. Vietnam War. Beatlemania, Motown, Woodstock. I saw this quote. Baby boomers were described as a tribe born into a time, but not a place or race. And if I think I had to look at any generation through that lens, it's going to be boomers. They were born into a time. And you think about all of the iconic things that were world changing that set the stage for what we now have when boomers were being born and growing up and entering into formative years. Ideology: justify, purify, sanctify. What do you think, boomers? If I was just off the cuff trying to describe what y'all stand for, this is probably going to be pretty much in the ballpark. Fair? What's that?
I said might need some unpacking.
Okay. Thank you. Let me back up to that so I can read it. Justify. Why do we do it? Well, see, I call boomers, I'm going to get ahead, I got to get ahead of myself in the discussion, but it's okay. I call boomers the one-way generation. There's only one way to do things.
Right.
Exactly. Your Honor, I rest my case. No, listen, this is not a shallow thing for boomers. Not at all. They are very sincere to believe that there is one right way to do things. It's not even like silence where there was an either or. For boomers, there's one right way to do it, and that's it. Period. And they're very sincere. It's no way, shape, or form. And they're very firm and sincere in that belief. Well, I'm sorry? This is why you're good managers, because there's only one way to do things, right? Well, it cuts down on a lot of confusion, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's true.
I get you. Yeah, so when you're differentiating ideology, that one-way thing, well, that covers justifying what you do. You have to do it the one way. Go ahead, Pastor.
Well, I'm a Gen X, but that's not how I perceive boomers, because I feel like they were the rebels. They were like the first rebellious generation.
Oh, they absolutely were.
But the sanctifying thing or purifying thing, or that's what's throwing me off. So that's why I said unpack.
Okay, so
I'm like,
sanctifying and purifying.
Yeah.
What I say when we started talking about boomers. Boomers rebelled against everything in the beginning. And then they grew up to be what they rebelled against. They totally grew up to be, and they're sitting there nodding their heads saying, yep, that's right. Okay, let's unpack this. Think about Woodstock, the protests in the 60s, music, psychedelic, hippies, psychedelic drugs, marijuana, LSD, and all that stuff. Birth control, exactly. All of that stuff was part of that movement. My theory is, and boomers, you feel free to weigh in on this, I think that boomers thought that the world was, and I've seen interviews with boomers about this, they had an idealistic view of what the world was and what it should be. And they weren't able to achieve the idealism. So then they settled into the norm. And they became that. They grew up. Because a lot of times as children, the world looks pretty magical. And then when you grow up, whoa, it's not so magical anymore, right? Well, not to mention, let's talk about this too, magical. Y'all grew up on Disney World. When it first came out, the world was a magical place. Was the number one thing that children answered, what do you want to be when you grow up when you were a kid? Astronaut, president. They were taught you can be anything. The world is a magical place and you can be anything. Well, then they grew up and like, whoa, that isn't it. Work requires sacrifice. That means I got to work all the time to get what I want. If I want a house, I got to work for it. And then they're looking at young people coming into their companies and you're saying, look, man, you got to pay your dues. You don't get to go from 0 to manager in 2.2 seconds. Right? Paying your dues is a big thing. So, bringing this full circle, if I look through the lens of that, justify, sanctify, that fits that profile to me. But I appreciate that you're thinking on it. And I appreciate you pointing that out, that you couldn't see it. Because you won't be the only one.
Well, we were also rebelling because people before us weren't doing it right. We were trying to make them do it right.
That's right, because there's only one way.
There's only one way, and so if getting on board was wrong, and so we protested against it. That's what we really came to.
Right. Yeah, well, there was, draft and all that. Go ahead, Stace.
When you are rebellious and then you learn that maybe you were wrong, then you have to scramble to figure out what comes next. So you change your mind, you mature, you grow into what you now perceive is better. And you also deal with whatever the ramifications of your former choices were. And if you truly rebelled for a long period of time, you probably have a lot of bad decisions in your life that you are now having to live with or undo.
Yep.
And you would spare your children and your grandchildren the same mistakes. And you know better because you've done it, and you've done it wrong. And therefore, listen to me, I know.
Yep. That's it in a nutshell. And so this is where I'm coming from. The one-way belief for boomers is very sincere. I've been there, done that. I don't want you to suffer from that. A lot of young people respond to that statement, yeah, boomers are exactly like that. Well, yeah, they are, but not for why you think. A lot of the stuff you learned the hard way. Yeah, so your point is well taken.
But the problem is, God doesn't do us that way. He knows what a bad decision is from the very beginning, but He still gives us the freedom of choice.
Amen.
That's exactly right. But I think we can all agree that as human beings, we're not exactly known for being smart in our decision making all the time. None of us are. We're all broken. Remember, the same messed up people everywhere. It's real. It's real. So it doesn't mean that I'm falling back to, none of these generations are bad or wrong. They're just different. These circumstances are so wildly different for you than they were for me, than they were for Gen Y or millennials and Gen Z. Yes, ma'am. Did you have a question?
I was reading too, it says that where I left off on the last day, somebody else will pick up where I left off to continue what I'm supposed to have done.
Right.
The sanctifying part, to me, just to unpack that just a little bit further, and I know that we're going slow, but the dialogue is the very best part of this, because we're communicating about real dynamics. And that is, I always have the impression that boomers have now sanctified their way, because they have come through the process through hard work and experience, and they have solidified their ideals. And so that's the only way, and then it becomes the sanctified way.
Yes. There's truth in that.
And they can justify why they feel that way.
Absolutely.
And they've put a lot of time into purifying the method.
Let me give the boomers a whole lot of credit here. I got interviewed on a podcast, an Adventist podcast in Australia a couple years ago, and they said, what would you say was the most admirable thing about boomers? And I said, they stuck to their guns. Even when I don't agree with the boomer view on things, I do really appreciate that they stand up for the beliefs, and they stand strong and firm in the beliefs. And I think that is a valuable thing. Do you understand what I mean by this? It's no criticism whatsoever. Without hesitation, that came out of my mouth without even thinking about it. Boomers stick to their guns.
Well, and they've been doing it for a long time, and they've carried a lot of responsibility and a lot of burden, and all the rest of us have been very happy to let them for a very long time.
Yeah, that's right.
But then when we try to help, we don't do it their way. And so we're doing it wrong, and we need to be corrected because, look, we've put a lot of time into learning how to be most effective. Let us share our knowledge with you. And we're saying that's not the only way there is to do this.
And here is where the generations start to part company.
Correct.
We are definitely going to unpack that when we get to millennials. Let's talk about Gen Z, because there's a constant battle between boomers and millennials that's been going on for years and years now. All right, my scripture for Gen X, I'm sorry, Gen X, not Gen Z. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. And here's why. It's baby bust, second smallest generation. Latchkey kids. Okay, so true story. My mom was a single mom. And folks, I'm going to tell you what, she worked her butt off to make sure my brother and I had. And as an adult now, I can only understand how broke and poor we were then. And she made it work. And I like to think my brother and I both turned out to be pretty decent men. And she's responsible for that. She made that work. Fourth grade, Garner Elementary School, Garner, North Carolina, was, 6 blocks from our house? I had a house key on a shoestring, a literal shoestring around my neck. I walked to school by myself or rode my bike. Went to school, came home by myself, unlocked the door. We lived in a duplex, you know, the place I'm talking about. And my instructions were go inside, lock the door, stay there until the neighbor lady got home. When she gets home, you can go out and play in the yard, but don't leave the yard. Okay, that was my whole growing up life. My mom was just out there fighting the fight, doing the best she could, right? I'm a latchkey kid. I spent a lot of time alone. Just the way it was. Would you ever put your fourth grader today? Absolutely not. Because the world's different now. Latchkey kids are a real thing. You were one too. Yeah, do you think that impacted? Yeah. Did this not impact who we became because we lived this? Now, our parents are out working. Not only that, it wasn't just divorce. You're starting to introduce 2 working parent homes now. So nobody's at home. Nobody's home minding the store except us, little kids. And we were little kids. Friends or family. I have friends from this 8th grade that I think of like brothers and sisters. We're still close to this day. Because we were all latchkey kids. And our parents were out doing their best. They were fighting the fight so that we could be okay. And we latched on to each other. And culturally, this played out in our entertainment and stuff too. If you don't believe me, think about movies like... No, Home Alone doesn't count. Think about movies where the kids are always present and you never see the parents. The Goonies, Charlie Brown cartoons, Boys in the Hood, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. How about the Breakfast Club? All of those. All of these movies, you can just go zip down them. Parents were never seen. It was always the kids. Well, we're kids watching this. What do you think this does for us? It normalized it, did it not, sir? This is our normal way of thinking. We had the first personal computers and games. Now later on, my mom becomes well placed at IBM, and we got the very first PC Junior at our house with those big 5.25-inch floppy drives. You had a half a dozen drives on it because you had to have all that stuff to make it work, and crazy stuff. And we got the first games too. I actually have a research study that says where they're comparing Donkey Kong to Gen X, and they think that Donkey Kong is the representation of an entire generation in that one game. Well, you're walking uphill, and there's a big gorilla at the top throwing barrels at you while you're trying to get up there to rescue the princess. And so many Gen X people identified with that sort of sentiment that they felt that was relevant. Okay. Gen Xers don't trust anything, ever. If you tell me something, you better be ready to prove it, because I don't trust you. I automatically don't trust you. It's a default. It isn't personal. Salesmen hate me. Salesmen can't stand me. My wife will tell you, we had a sales manager one time. He got furious with me because, I'm sorry, I don't trust a word you say, and I'm in sales, so I get what's going on here. And then with that comes sharp cynicism humor. It's our favorite type. We don't even invite it, it just shows up.
Gen X invented memes.
Yes, Gen X invented memes. That's a good one. That's exactly right. If it's sharp, sarcastic humor, Gen X all over it. We think that's the most hilarious thing ever. Well, you're being extra generational. You're being extra lingual, right? Gen X tend to walk around looking serious. Have you ever, Pastor, your kids ever accused you of being mad or angry even when you're not? Mine did it all the time.
I'm more aloof than ain't mad or angry.
But you're not mad or angry. That's the thing. You just have this serious look on your face. Resting mad face, yes. My wife met me and she says, I smile at you and you don't smile back. What's there to smile about? I'm smiling on the inside. And to me,
You tell me I'm smiling on the inside.
and I felt there was nothing at all wrong with that. I have interviewed hundreds and hundreds of Gen Xers who identify with this sentiment. And I ask them about their kids, and yeah, my kids think I'm mad all the time. I'm not. It's a Gen X thing. I'm not claiming I actually understand it. I got some theories about it. Impacts for Gen X, Berlin Wall. Speaking for myself, I was in Germany in the army when the Berlin Wall came down, and I was stationed in Berlin, and I stood guard on the Berlin Wall. That was a big deal to me. Challenger, yeah, it's a big one. Energy crisis, economics, the gas shortages in the 70s. I got some pictures of that, and there's Pintos in the lines of cars getting gas. When's the last time you saw a Pinto? AIDS, crack, and Rodney King. Guess what, Gen X? We get to claim that. That's ours to own. That happened in our growing up years. Jim and Tammy Faye is another one. Jimmy Swaggart. Yeah, there's a whole slew of religious scandals. Desert Storm. 9/11. Slackers and hackers. You've never been called a slacker, have you, Pastor Travis? What did the teacher say to McFly in the high school hallway in Back to the Future? You're a slacker, McFly. We got called this by Time Magazine. Bad child evil movies. Chucky and all that stuff. The Omen, all of those awful, really evil movies. Bad child movies. This was a Gen X norm. We grew up with this. Friday the 13th, all of that.
I wanted to say something about you said the gas shortage remember going from a gasoline car to a diesel Rabbit.
Mm-hmm.
And they were quite expensive at the time, so I bought a used one, and I got a pretty good deal on it.
There was a lot of controversy about it too, wasn't there?
Yes, and you know what? I also read in the Popular Mechanics I could run the diesel engine on vegetable oil. That's before any of these things were ever done. And if I ran out, I went up to a house. This happened to me twice, and asked me for some vegetable. Why do you want vegetable? I said, because I need some fuel for my car. They're like, you're going to ruin that engine. And they stood at their door and watched me pour it in there because I read from Popular Mechanics that it would work, and it did, and they were just sitting there shaking their head.
And we drove down the road with exhaust that
I can go
smelled
to the
like
store
french
and buy
fries.
vegetable oil.
Yes. The exhaust that smelled like French fries. Gen X, I told you about perpetual distrust. If it's institutional, we don't trust it. And I mean, in secular society, Gen X doesn't trust marriage, doesn't trust church. You know, we talk a lot about millennials and Gen Z being absent from our churches, and I never hear anybody say it, but Gen X is missing too. The large majority of my Gen X friends are not in church anymore. They've left.
We're so small, nobody talks about it.
And we're so small, nobody talks about it. That's right.
You go straight from boomers to millennial, and nobody talks about it.
Nobody talks about Gen X at all.
I like it that way.
In some ways, yes. Yes.
Why would you say that my generation, Gen Zs, are missing inside of the church? What's the number one reason?
Number one reason why, because church doesn't make sense to you. How we do church doesn't make sense to you. Now, I'm not saying that how we do church is wrong. All I'm saying is how we do church doesn't make sense to you. If I had to point to one thing, that's probably what I'll default to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in Gen Z. We'll see if we can unpack that a little more. And folks, I don't claim that I have all the answers. This is people science, and it's complicated beyond measure. The number of books, I should own stock in Amazon books by now. And the amount of reading that I have to do to stay current on this is very complex. And there's way more generational stuff to uncrate here. I'm trying to do, 10 weeks of stuff in an hour. So I can't give you everything today, but I'm going to try to give you as much as I can. Yes, ma'am.
Why is it really important for me to understand these other generations? Why is that important for me when it comes to reaching others for Christ?
It's important to you because every generation has a completely different perspective of what the world looks like to them. If we're trying to minister to somebody, we're human beings, right? And if I'm not far enough down the road of my walk with Christ to understand that it ain't all about Tim. And I've arrived at that place. I finally got it through my thick head that it's not all about me. But for someone who doesn't know Jesus, they don't know that. Me is all I have. So who I am as a person in the world and how I see the world around me matters. And if I want to reach you, I have to be able to speak your language, just like I was talking about today. If I can speak your language, if I can meet you where you are, let me guess, you're Gen Z. It's okay with you if I'm a boomer. All you're asking me to do is understand where you're coming from. Is that right? It's funny how I knew that. I've never met this man or talked to him before. That's the whole point. And it's really not that complicated. Remember I said understanding equals love, and love equals understanding. If I can understand you, I can learn to love you. It's okay with me that you're different from me. I don't have a problem with that. I get it. I get where you're coming from. I get how you landed in that place. I don't see it that way, but I get how you did, and that's okay. I'm going to love you, period. It makes it easier to do it. Does that make sense?
I got something to add.
Yes, sir.
To answer my sister's question, it's called intellectual adaptability. That's the doctrine of basically being able to adapt. if we all look around here, like how many Gen Zs like around my age, probably my sister over there and my brother. I don't know how old you are, but I'm assuming you are in that same category. But just to make it simple, we all have to adapt, because to bring the youth inside of the church, it's not changing the way that we do things as Seventh-day Adventists, but it's changing the method of how we do it. So for us to bring Seventh-day Adventist youth inside of the church, it's all about adapting and speaking the lingo of Gen Zs. That's basically what I'm getting out of this whole thing.
So if you're a silent, how do you learn to speak Gen Z? Yeah. If you don't function with anybody who's Gen Z, your children are all grown, how do you even begin to learn to speak?
First of all, don't avoid it. How many people you know that are Seventh-day Adventists that don't have any non-Adventist friends? Well, how do you minister to people if you don't know people that aren't Christians? The first thing is, I need to hang with this young man. We need to get to know each other. We can be different. That's okay. Gen Z is all about being different. This is the most diverse generation in history, y'all. They're all about being different. If a Gen Z person walks into a predominantly white church, odds are they will turn around and leave immediately, because they notice the absence of diversity, not the presence of it. It's a different way of thinking. Where previous generations, I mean, and as population goes, we're no longer white America. That threshold's been crossed now that other races outnumber Caucasians. I'm not making a racial thing here. What I'm talking about is culture. There was a time when white churches were normal, but if a Gen Z kid walks into a white church, white Gen Z kids will walk into a white church and they'll turn around and leave, because there's no adversity there. Not adversity. Diversity. Thank you. Am I wrong?
You're right.
So, understanding, and let's meet. Hey, it's okay. They're okay where I'm at. They want to understand me too. Am I right?
I like this term, intellectual adaptation.
Yeah. All this discussion is about is helping us to learn how to understand each other. That's it. And we get that. Ellen White said Jesus' method alone will bring people to Christ. He met with people as one who desired their good. He met them where they are, as one who desired their good. He met their needs, won their confidence, and then he bade them to follow me. Thinking that God is smarter than Tim, I see an order in that. The last thing Jesus asked them to do was to follow him. He worked with them first. He met them, earned their trust. Sister White explains that very clearly. That's all we got to do.
Can I say something quick?
Absolutely.
It's like when two people are arguing. It's heated, you know, and everything. And then as soon as the other person knows that you understand his position, that comes out. And everything, you know, okay.
Oh, that's
okay.
right.
Because I understand what happened to you, you know.
We have this overriding need to be right.
Yeah.
We do. Human beings are terrible about this. I got to be right. But you're not. And neither am I. You could be both right, but you could be both wrong too. All right, let's move on here. Let's get into millennials. Do we have any millennials? Except for Justin. Justin, you got to represent your whole generation, my friend. Look, millennials are actually a really cool generation if you get them. Okay, Phil, as a representative of the baby boomer generation, what is the number one thing boomers complain about millennials?
Lack of commitment.
Okay, that's what would be one. My survey has a little bit different answer. Time? Okay. I'm going to say respect. Number one thing always heard, interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people now. I've been doing this about 10 years now. Number one thing boomers complain about millennials is lack of respect. But let's unpack that for a second. Boomers, y'all were taught to respect your elders. Were you not? But the same person that taught you to respect your elders also told you this: you have to earn my respect. I would have been told that. Most boomers answer that in the affirmative. Mom, your experience was pretty similar to that, right?
Yeah, we were taught to respect the elders.
Right, okay. But let's unpack this for a second. Millennials come along and they look at it and they say, okay, you're telling me that I have to respect you because you're old, and that you'll give me your respect in return at some undefined moment in the future that you can't define, nor will you define, and you'll let me know.
Sounds like a double standard.
It sounds like a double standard. Now, we can argue all day whether it is a double standard or not. What I'm telling you is millennials come along and they look at that and they go, I don't accept that. I'm glad to give you my respect, but the only thing I ask is you give it to me in return. Yes?
Can I have the microphone for a second? I'm not a baby boomer, I'm an Xer. And I'm the mother of 5 millennials. And I am an advocate for millennials. I actually raised them to be that way. But my biggest complaint with millennials is they have all these altruistic, save the world ideals. They're so idealistic. And they expect me to fund them while they save the world. I value their values. I'm excited that they care. I don't even mind when they remind me that I need to recycle in 3 different bins. I've actually got into the habit of that.
Yes.
At the same
I
time,
can't
they
disagree
won't
with
work
any
for-
of that.
They won't work for an organization whose ideals they don't believe in. So what are they going to do, and how are they going to survive until they find one that does? Oh, live in mom's basement?
Well, there's... Oh, she's deliberately bringing out the stereotypes, right? To make me defend it. All right. You can't compare circumstances. What was going on 2000 when the millennials were starting to come out of high school, hit college and all that stuff? We hit the Great Recession. Then we had COVID a few years later. Not that many years later. Their generation is sandwiched between 2 of the biggest economic crises we've ever faced. And monetarily, they are nowhere near the same place that boomers were at their same age, that Gen X was, that Silence were at the same age. So, not to mention, when you factor in inflation and you factor in that the labor market in the early 2000s, we were still paying wages from the 70s. My own company was doing this. And we have been, in recent years, totally restructuring our whole pay thing to meet today's needs. But it's real. So economically, the ones that were living in the basement, and look, let me tell you something else. The more I do this, the more I've come to the conclusion that there are just as many slackers in Silent Gen and Baby Boom and Gen X and Millennials and Gen Z as there are in any other generation. The percentage is probably pretty close. You're always going to have those. But what happens? Like, I'm a corporate trainer. We have big classes. We trained over 1,000 people last year in our classes. And we give them an evaluation of the courses every time they come through. On a scale of 1 to 10. Everybody comes through, gives 8 9s or 10s, 8 9 10, 8 9 10, except for the one guy that gives you a 6. You know what my whole department spends the rest of the week talking about? The 6. This is what we do with our generational differences. We talk about the one kid. I had an elder in my church get up one day and said, well, young people, they all do drugs and they all can't read. And he was talking about millennials, and I'm like, dude, millennials are online. They read more than you ever will in your whole lifetime. They just don't read in the same way, and they don't read the same things you are. So that's not an accurate statement. You got to put everything into context. That's all.
I think also millennials like to be in the uncomfortable zone. They're not afraid of conflict. They live to bring to light the skeletons in the closet.
Oh, I'm dying to hear what Pastor Travis weighs in on this.
No, I'm just from if you talk about generations in the pastoral ministry, it's interesting to there's a big difference in mindset between a boomer pastor and a millennial pastor.
Yeah, it's huge.
And it's a so yeah, I mean it kind of what like I mean I agree with everything you guys are saying, but if a millennial cannot align their personal beliefs with the organization they're working for, they will quit.
Yes.
And so there has been more millennial pastors quitting than I've seen it my whole ministry, and they quit, and most boomers stay with the church until they retire. So that's and so like and Gen X, I don't know if we fit in. I mean, it's kind of a little bit of
we
mix of
do.
both.
We sort of started this trend because for us, and it doesn't exactly.
I mean, I'm a younger X, but yeah.
Yeah, this doesn't exactly play out in pastoral ministry exactly, but I've seen some signs of it. We decided early on, first of all, in the 70s when manufacturing jobs started to disappear, and grandparents that had been working at the same company for 30 years, Gen X is going, okay, yeah, I don't trust that. So that led us to being more comfortable to make a move to another company to better our resume.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, moving. Maybe not changing careers.
We might not change careers, but moving to companies. So now the thing where, oh, you've worked at more than 2 companies and we can't hire you, you're a risk. Now, 10, 11, 12 companies in 7 or 8 years is nothing. That's normal. That is normal. I work very closely with our HR department about this. I'm telling you, it's so. We see people, and it is inefficient. Their reasoning for why they're doing it, I don't fault. They're trying to get to something better, but there's not always the outcome they're after from it. Yes, ma'am.
So I've worked in HR for years, right? So I've worked in human resources for many, many years. And, in the beginning of my career, there were all of these standards on professionalism, right? There was a way that you spoke and a way that you dressed, and there's certain
The shoes that you
behaviors,
wore.
the shoes that you wore. No, all of these things were dictated to you. And then millennials came along, and they said, but why? Why do we have to wear this type of shoe? Why can't we wear t-shirts? Why does our hair have to be a natural color? Why do we have to cover our tattoos? How does that make us a better worker? How does that make us a better customer service rep? How does that affect us at all? And we're going, because it's always been that way. Because if you interact with older people, their initial impression of you is going to be that you're less efficient, and they won't want to do business with you, and then it'll cost our company money. And they're going, well, that's stupid. I'm not going to work here.
Well,
And then after a while, we have no one who's willing to work for us, and then we change our rules because guess what? You got to have workers.
well, it's bigger than that. They point to, for a good 18 years now, more than half of Americans have not one, but more than one tattoo. And most of them also have more than one piercing. Now, in the world that I grew up in, that was not done. When I enlisted in the Army, I was told point blank, you're not allowed to get a tattoo. You can't do it. You weren't allowed to serve in the unit that I was in unless you didn't have any tattoos.
Unless you in the Navy, right, Tim? Many folks that went-
Don't, we're not going there. We're already going long, Dad. Quit opening up more cans of worms. Did you have something else?
Well, I wanted to just say something about, I know, what was it, the 80s and 90s, there was compromise. Our church did not look at some of the things that are happening today. They thought that was compromising with the world. I mean, that's the way I remember seeing and
Oh
being
yeah,
with different
absolutely,
churches.
absolutely.
Well, you don't want to compromise. You got to hold the line, you know.
If you ever get a chance to listen to the history of our church podcast, it's really good. And some of the guys from Humans of Adventism and a couple other places did one called How the Church Works, and that's really good too. I don't want to get off on that tangent. You're aware of those, I think, aren't you? Anyway, but it would, even if you don't agree with it, you'll land on a different perspective of how people arrive at some of their conclusions. That's all I'm promoting there. All right. So millennials, they're the most studied generation in history, because about the time they hit the 7th grade, everybody else started figuring out, oh, they're different.
That's because they had credit cards in 7th grade.
Well, they also, some of them had devices in their hands as very young, right? They were consumers at an earlier age. And retailers were all over that. And marketing to Gen X was really heavy, but man, when it came to millennials, they really ramped it up. And they're the most educated generation in history, because by the time they came along, how did you achieve success? You went to college. College is now the norm. Three generations in, college is your path to success. It's accepted that way. But the late boomers and Gen Xers that were their parents weren't in the same financial place. So how were they going to go to college? They took out student loans. And that was the only way to get there, but that was the only path to success. So what did you do? You took out the loan. So now they come out of college hugely in debt. We talked about changing the status quo in respect. Millennials want to know why. And when they express their concerns about why, I find myself repeatedly not able to argue with their thinking on it. I don't agree with their outcome, but their question is valid. Does that make sense? All right. They adapt to tech easy. Xers were fairly easy, but it was normal. Open to change. More than any other generation previously, millennials see people through diverse eyes up to this point. They had the least number of two-parent homes. Do you think that affected who they became? Absolutely. Columbine High School, that was the beginning of high school shootings, school shootings. Google, social media, smartphones. Oh, and let me say something about Gen X. So Gen X was called by Pew Research Center as the neglected middle child generation. But I'll advocate for Gen X all I need to. We invented Google, y'all. That's all I got to say. And Amazon. And Fubu and Williams Sonoma and Gen X killed it. We absolutely right. All right. War on Terror. Great Recession. Election of Barack Obama. Same-sex marriage laws. That all became normalized. Now, I'm not opening up the discussion about these things. How we feel about them doesn't change the fact that that's an iconic moment in their history that impacted them. Millennials believe you should be transparent about everything.
But they're not.
Yeah, they are. Alarmingly so.
My two are not.
Well, there are exceptions. But here's the context I mean this in. When you were coming up through your work career, did you discuss what you made with anyone? Never. It was not done. But millennials are totally okay with that. They'll tell everybody what they make, and anybody. They're like, I've seen this play out 100 times. There's always exceptions, always. But that's very disconcerting when you get to Xers and boomers like, oh, no. See, we'll revert to silent gen and say, we don't talk about that. Because now you're making me explain why I don't pay you the same as I pay him. And that's a Gen Z thing too. Millennials are marrying later, they're having children later, or they're not having them at all. We've got, my daughter is not planning, she's had one kid, she's not planning on having any more. We got 2 of our kids that are saying no children at all. That's their world. I can't influence them. We've made it clear how much we would like to have grandkids, and that's where we've got to leave it. They felt enormous pressure to adult. Now, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself on here. You know the whole thing about millennials and participation trophies? Yeah. Have you ever stopped to think who was giving the trophies to them? Parents, which were from which 2 generations? Boomers and X. So why did we blame them for it?
They were indulged. They were coddled.
Well, I can make a case boomers were too. Boomers were the first generation to have a defined youth culture. They spent more money and had more money spent on them than any previous generation.
2-parent home, moved to the city, mom and dad both started working.
You see my point here, right? Again, the emphasis is there's nothing wrong with any of those scenarios, but they're wildly different from each other. This whole thing about entitlement is based on culture. I can make a case that boomers are a very entitled generation. The customer's always right.
But the customer isn't always right. So.
No, you're not right. If you run a business, you immediately know this. But so many people do believe that, and I'm not mistaken, right? So look, this is not a cut on boomers. I'm just using this as examples. Millennials have their own version of that going on. X has their own version of that going on. Silents do too. And Z does too. Just understanding it.
What do you mean
Pressure to adult. Well, here's the greatest example. When I turned 16, my mom asked me, what do you want for your birthday? I want 2 things. There's a book at the bookstore I want to get, and I want to go get my driver's license. When I hit 17, I enlisted in the Army. I wanted to get out of there. I was ready to get out.
Do you mean lack of pressure to adult or a change in pressure to adult? Because I feel like millennials weren't asked to adult until later in their maturity.
Well, and there's a reason for that too. And I can explain that. There's a big difference. When you hit 18, 19, you're
kicked out of the house?
right, get out. Get out, go be an adult, right? Okay. Take this back to the silence and before them. In the 30s and 40s, 1 in 3 Americans lived on farms. Okay, this is where you learn you're an adult like really young. You had to collect eggs so you could have breakfast and pick tomatoes so that there was dinner. And I asked this in my classes of how many of you grew up on a farm? Did anybody in here grow up on a farm? You did? How old were you when you first drove a piece of farm machinery?
Young.
Average answer is 6. 6. And that was normal, was it not, sir?
Yes.
Absolutely. But would you put your 6-year-old now on a tractor pulling a disc harrow? No, probably not. Because culturally we've changed. Here's the point of all of this. If you examine how life was different for you, you had different access to adult behavior and adult responsibility than the generation that came after you.
Well, responsibility is how I nearly responded when you asked me what do I think about
Millennials. Yeah.
that lack of responsibility. They just don't seem to have been taught it or required to learn.
Oh, no, they may have been taught, they just didn't absorb it.
Well, it didn't have the same impact.
Same effect.
Right. Okay, so if you want to talk about true instant gratification, I've got to go out and get the eggs so I can eat. That's instant gratification. because I have to. There's a consequence that is not acceptable. But I can tell you this. When Stace and I raised our kids to be kids, we wanted them to go to college. We wanted them to have better than we had. This is part of this explanation too. We all raised our children to get better than we had. Right. And part of that was we removed things that were access to adult responsibility and adult behavior. So now they no longer have access to it. So then you can tell them about it all day long, but if you don't have access to it, is it real to you? Probably not. It's like introducing if I give you a Star Trek communicator, obviously you're probably not going to be able to operate it. I give a Gen Z somebody a rotary phone, they're going to look at it like, what is this? They don't have a point of reference for it. That's what's happened. Did we do the wrong thing?
Is that bad?
No, I don't think it's bad, but I think it had unintended consequences. I like to think that Stace and I were good parents. Everybody got through high school, and 2 of them got through college. I'm calling it a win. But if I look back then, I see things that we could have taught them that we didn't because we were trying to give them better than we had. You know, when I was a kid growing up, every kid in our greater town, everybody went and picked tobacco in the summertime, even 4th graders and stuff, by hand, right? My mom wasn't going to let me do that. Not for long, because she's been out there, she bought her first car picking cotton. She didn't want that for me. She wanted better for me. And I took that with my kids, and my kids are taking the same stance.
I think that the parenting advice changed over the years too, though.
Absolutely.
You're not born knowing how to raise children, and so you learn from your parents, you learn from the materials of the day, whatever the advice is. And you know, we were advised that a child's job was to be a child. That they learn through play. And
They learn to be socially interactive. They learn to play football and interactive sports and things like that. Every parent bought into that.
And if you had a child who was struggling in school, you didn't, even a teenager, you didn't require them to get an after-school job. They needed to spend that time with a tutor learning to get their grades right, because school was their first job,
School was the first job.
you know?
So you see, I don't think it was wrong, but I do think it had an unintended consequence. So what is happening for millennials and Gen Z, they're coming into adult maturity that we were coming into in our teens when they're 30. And it's not their fault. It's just different.
Yeah, there are causes for it that may be rooted in evil, in my personal opinion, but I'll give you an example. And I don't want to get you off track.
Sure. Yeah, you're fine.
But when I went to school, my parents told me, if you get disciplined or spanked at school by the principal, when you get home, you got another spanking coming.
We don't do that.
Today, the kids go to school and they're told, if your parents spank you, you can turn them in and the police will arrest them.
Yeah, and that's a big, hairy conversation, and I do not disagree. But here's the thing. I think that we as human beings tend to be guilty of hanging our hat on one thing when we're talking about another group of people. And the longer that I've studied this, I've come to understand that it has so many layers. Every issue has layers and layers and layers. So your point is not wrong. There was a different outcome then that we don't have now. But I don't think that it makes them wrong. I just think it makes the circumstances different because they didn't create that. And yet, what do we as older adults do? We blame them for that. We blame them for that circumstance. Well, you don't have any discipline. You weren't ever taught any discipline. But that's not their fault. That's our fault. If my kids lack discipline, it's my fault as their parent that I didn't give it to them. But then there's also the layer that there's some kids that don't, how great you raised them, they're still going to be the prodigal son. And there's nothing you can do about it. So again, there's layers. You're not at all wrong. What I'm saying is that I think it's much more complicated than pointing to one thing and saying that that's the reason why it ended up this way. Go ahead.
All throughout history, you see extremism. And then you see people fighting extremism, and they fight it by causing the pendulum to go too far the other way before it falls to balance. And so in the discipline area, the reaction to
Thank you, brother.
to abuse, exposure of abuse, was to swing the pendulum too far the other way. And for any children who grew up with parents who their idea of discipline was the same amount of discipline for every infraction, and that meant bruises up and down the backs of your legs, which most of my age group and older can say they experienced at least once in their life, that would be child abuse today. And there is some legitimacy to that argument. Trends in discipline have gone back and forth throughout history. And constantly we're looking for balance. And usually we find ourselves in some sort of flux on some issue where the pendulum is too far one way or the other, and we're looking to bring it back to right.
Yeah, and like Mr. Phil said, let's not underestimate the power of Satan in all of this conversation. Because, you know, he's successfully destroyed our families in the United States.
I saw your last clip, the highest level of mental illness and suicide.
Yep.
That's very heartbreaking.
I have a coworker that's son committed suicide last year for no known reason. Kid's a star athlete, great grades, college scholarships, beautiful girlfriend, everything that you could think that a kid, high school kid, could possibly want. And he hung himself.
I think it's been through the generations, because when I was in middle school, I mean, I had a couple of friends just take their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So why? And then I get in high school, and the same thing. It's like, and I think that's like generation to generation.
It is in generation, but the rates have been consistently climbing in the last 20 or so years, and especially with millennials and Gen Z, and more of their generations are reporting mental illness now than any other generation before. I'm not offering explanations for these things, but I am pointing it out that that's a factor for us to consider in how we minister to them. Because if I know that millennials and Gen Z have higher suicide rates, if I even get the glimpse that that might be a thing going on with them, I'm going to pay way more attention. You get my point? So you're not wrong at all. But the rates seem to be skyrocketing, alarmingly so. And everybody's trying to figure that out. Nobody knows why yet. And millennials are the single most criticized generation in history. This is why I always say there wouldn't be any millennial bashing when I spoke to one church. I got to tell this story. And I made the statement. Somebody was going off about millennials, and I went, I hate to tell you this, but they're your kids. You could have heard a pin drop.
It finally dawned on me.
And then this one lady, we were talking about millennials and change, and I wanted to just applaud. You were there. She stood up and she says, I'll tell you why baby boomers don't like millennials, because we're afraid of them. They represent change, and we don't want change. We're comfortable with it, with where we are in our status quo. And she says, I'm afraid of that. I don't like it. I recognize the need for it, but I don't want it. And I was like, yes, thank you for being brave enough to get up and really be transparent about that. All right, Gen Z. So you guys are real new. We're still trying to figure you out. But do not underestimate this generation, folks. They're brilliant. Millennials are too. This is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in history, not just here. And I mentioned earlier, diversity is noticed when it's not there. These are digital natives, true digital natives. Some of Gen Z has had a device in their hand since age 4. I'm not going to argue the whether that's right or wrong. I'm telling you, it's real. Large numbers of them. They can do this way better than all the rest of us. And let me tell you something else. They know how to make a living with it in ways that you've never imagined. How people out there are living right now. Because you know every profession is short of people. And everybody's saying, well, what are they doing? They're not living off unemployment. They're making money. They're making a living outside the norm. They're making legitimate incomes outside of the normal employment chain. And we totally do not have an answer for that. We're not ready for that. We don't know how to deal with it. All right. Gen Z is pragmatic. They're very practical. They like real. Even when it hurts, I think, from my interactions with them. Is that correct? You'd rather me be brutally honest with you as long as I'm being real? Okay. And they're financial minded. They have a sense about money. Gen Z is thinking about retirement. Well, they're to that, they're smart enough to see that, hey, we're going to have to figure out a different way.
So Gen Z knows they're not going to have a Social Security income when they retire.
Right.
It's going to be gone before Xers can take advantage of
Yeah,
it more than likely.
it'll be gone before we do.
If we want to retire, we're going to have to be self-made.
Yep. And they're figuring it out. Gen Z is wired. In one of my presentations, I said 76.4% of millennials do this. And this hand shoots up immediately in the back of the room. This is a true story. It's in Charleston. Remember that? Excuse me, sir, that's 72.4. He fact-checked me on the spot. They're all over it. Make sure you know what you're talking about. And their parents are Gen X, who are cynical and skeptical. Just saying. Gen Z is stressed because they're looking at the world around them and they're trying to figure out where they fit. They're looking at financial crises, at employment crises. They're looking at a world where they feel the need to actually make themselves a brand and market themselves accordingly. And they're trying to figure that out, and that's stressing them out. It would stress me out. I think this is great scripture for Gen Z. There's neither Jew nor Greek, neither bond nor free. There's neither male nor female. We're all one in Jesus Christ. Gen Z wants everybody to be the same. Tell me if I'm right about this. This is the negative side of your generation, for example. I've been asked this question in my classes at work. If you and Pastor Travis are doing the exact same job and he makes more money than you, you don't think that's fair. Generally speaking. Why?
Generally speaking, yes.
Yeah. Why is it that I'm doing the same exact work that Pastor Travis is, but I'm getting paid less? He's only getting paid more because he's been here longer. That's it.
He has experience.
Well, that's the key. Because if I put you on one of those old-fashioned sailing ships with the sails that you had to use all the ropes and all that, could you handle that? No, but what if I put you on that sailing ship with Pastor Travis, and he's been sailing on that ship for 20 years?
I'm going to be good.
Well, yes, but you know why? Because he's been there when the storm broke out, and he knew which sails to leave up and which ones don't. You don't. You're doing the same work he's not, but you don't have the same experience. That's the difference. I get asked this question a lot from Gen Z. Now, remember, they're trying to figure it out, y'all. They don't have the life experience yet. It's not their fault. There's nothing wrong with them. They just haven't been there yet. They don't have the time and distance. All right, Gen Z has had a lifetime of gun violence and school shootings. A lifetime. This has been part of their daily world forever. They did a survey a couple of years ago. Number one thing Gen Z is afraid of is school shootings. They feel like they can't go to school and be safe. Would that affect you? Yeah. Climate change. And look, I don't care if you agree with this or not. I know there's people that don't agree with it. But if you've been hearing about it your entire life, it's real to you. They wonder if the world's going to come to an end. It's legit. They've been being told this their whole lives. They've never known a world where this wasn't talked about. Racial and gender equality is normal in their thinking, and it should be the norm. And we all know it's not, but it should be. And they're looking at us older folks and going, am I wrong, sir? What do you mean this isn't? Why? This should have always been normal. George Floyd. This is reality. And COVID-19. Gen Z wants to be included. They want to be part of everything. They don't want to be left out because I'm too young. Get me involved now. I want to be involved. Help me learn to steer that. Am I correct, sir? Yeah. And they want to be part of the decision making, not in the wrong way, but in the right way. I want to know how he thinks about it because, man, the world he grew up in, not like mine. I'm not going to see what he sees. And they want to be part of that. We would be foolish not to include them in what we're doing with our ministries because they can help us. Yes?
I had a question, or a comment at least. Don't you think some of the suicides, a lot of it is due to the fact that people are confused? The devil is the author of confusion, and he's created confusion in our world big time.
I believe that the number of suicides are because people don't have hope.
Well, aren't they confused?
Yeah.
They're confused. They don't know what to believe.
And how many of people out there don't know Jesus? They don't have a reason to hope. There's nothing to hope for. And if I'm a kid and I'm looking at it, look, you want to know why millennials aren't having kids? Because they're looking at the world and they're saying, I'm not bringing a child into this. This is a mess. Why would I do that? And here's Gen Z coming up. There's a school shooting nearly every other day. Yes, and in some cases 2 or 3 a day. This is their norm. This is their normal. You understand that? This is normal. No wonder people are confused and they don't have hope. And if you're looking at the world without anybody ever telling you about Christ, and you don't understand the hope that is truly there, then what? To me, that looks pretty bleak and pretty hopeless. And I completely can see where people feel like I got nothing to live for. What's that? Shoot.
No, I was gonna say, or they go the other way and just say, like the Bible says, hey, let's eat and drink because tomorrow we die. So, just throw caution to the wind.
Throw caution to the wind, right? What's it going to matter? All right. So what next? Old versus young, or young versus old?
I'll say that it's
Here's the thing. It shouldn't have to be that way. Us older folks need to understand that we got to understand that our world is gone and it's never coming back. We don't have to agree with it. We don't have to like it, but it is real. The world that they're in right now is what's present here today. I don't like it. Sometimes I'm downright just totally confused and disgusted by it. But I bet if I put him in a time machine and send him back to my time, he'd find the same exact thing. It just would be a different story. We like to romanticize the good old days, but I bet you that if you started picking apart the good old days, it may not look as good as we think. Yes, sir.
just to back you up. my brother, let's take it in the context of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We know back then, who here knows about the Heritage Singers? Give me just a little more time. So it's like, that's back then, but now the Gen Z's age is like, we hear more like Hillsong. We hear more about elevation worship. It's two different things now.
That's two different things now.
Yeah, so for me to go back to heritage singers compared to now elevation worship is going to be two different
Well, that's
realities.
right. And see, I love what y'all did. Y'all did something really beautiful today. You had something for everybody here. That was a beautiful thing. I immediately picked up on that. I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. Because there's room in Christ for everybody. You understand? It's got no reason. We don't have any reason to fight about this. There's room here for everybody. I want this young man who's in church. You know what's cool about, let me touch on millennials, and Gen Z's doing this too. Do you understand how many independent ministries that millennials are out there doing outside the church on their own? On their own. If you don't believe me, go look up Oz Table Talk, Humans of Adventism, Justin Koo, I don't know, help me out, Pastor Travers. I'm forgetting about a dozen of them, but there's a bunch of them. And these are Adventist young people that are out there trying to spread the gospel. And they've spent their own money and their own time, and they're trying to do something that they felt was right. Now, I'm going to tell you this. Number one answer I get when I ask people about why they left the church: they don't see Jesus here. Number one answer: I left the church. Our own son said this: I left the church because I didn't see Jesus there. Now, he's into church now, okay? But he had to take a step back away from it. And you know, when I stop and think about it, I get it. Roger Hernandez talks about the three things we fight the most about: drums, dress, and diet. Who cares? I want you to know Christ. Yeah, I know I'm speaking Adventist blasphemy. No, those things. Yeah, thank God, right? But seriously, Stace and I have been to these churches. We've seen them. Our ministry, our biggest ministry, the one that we like to do the most, is working with churches that are struggling for membership. They're dying. Yes, sir.
Isn't the body of the church?
Yeah.
Just a building?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And it's made up of a lot of different parts that do a lot of different things. And see, you know, when you went to high school, there was those that were good at math and those were good at English, and you had that 2 or 3 weirdo kids that were good at both. Right? Struggle was real, right? I'm the English kid. I rocked English. I failed math like nobody's business. But my wife is the math kid. We're just different. Look, if there's 2 ways to arrive at a conclusion, and I'm wrapping this up now. My wife and I are a great example of this generational discussion, okay? If there's 2 ways to arrive at a conclusion, she's going to arrive there and I'm going to arrive here. Every time. It's like hilarious, and we drive each other nuts with this. And we're happily married for 25 years. Because, you know what? It don't have to be my way. See, it's about the outcome. The outcome is reaching people for Christ. That's the outcome. My brother said about the body. That's exactly right. This is a building. The early church was held in people's houses and on lawns, and, you know. And look, I'll get in a lot of trouble for these Adventist blasphemies that I'm speaking of, but what I'm telling you is simply this: let's keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is that when we reach everybody in the world, Christ comes, right? Isn't that basically what we're told? And we spend a lot of time focusing on the end. But I already know what's coming in the end. I know what end time prophecy says. I can't do anything about it. I can't prepare for it. I can't change it. I can't do a thing about it. It's coming. So why don't I focus on the here and now and trying to reach people for Christ? Because Jesus can come right now. I want to go home. I'm tired.
Amen.
Jesus can come right now, and I would just, yes. And so would you. I'm not saying we're doing anything bad or wrong. I don't mean that at all. What I'm saying is, let's keep the main thing the main thing. Let's focus on this. Because the world is lacking hope. And we have the greatest gift to give to them.
Amen.
And all we need to do is learn to talk to each other. And learn to understand, and understanding equals love. Yes, ma'am.
Doesn't it really all boil down to judgment?
Sure it does. Everybody judges, though.
Sure, but if you see each person who's this off. Hello? Okay. If you see each person, I think about the way Jesus looks at me. With love in his eyes, and he looks at me like his daughter. He wants me to be at home with him, and I'm an empty nester, and I miss my kids so desperately, and I can just feel the pull from wherever they are. I want them to come home. I want to spend time with them. I miss them, and I know he feels that way about me. And if every person that I interact with, no matter what their background is, no matter what their life experience, no matter what their political views are, no matter if they perceive the world differently than I do, when Jesus looks at them, he looks at them with that same love in his eyes that he looks at me with, or that I look at my children with. And I can't judge them as worthy or not. That's not my place. He already said they're worthy. I died for them. They're worthy.
Yep.
They're worthy right where they stand before they ever become sanctified. They're worthy just because he said so.
That's right. And whatever their sin is, how about we just start loving them through it? Because I got mine, and you got yours, and you know it if you're honest. None of us are worthy. So whoever you look at in whatever topic, let's just love them through it. Folks, we have gone way long here, but I've enjoyed it very much with discussion. I want to share a couple real quick things with you, and we'll dismiss. My wife has taught me something. Remember I told you I wasn't always a good communicator? A few years back, she told me, I'm going to start trying to make people understand that I see them. I see them when I connect with them, the person at the drive-through, the person at the counter in the store, whatever. And she started doing that. She started looking people in the eye and speaking to them. And I watched this happen. And I watched people's whole demeanor just blossom and light up. Every once in a while there was somebody that was a little more crusty and they weren't going to do that. But most of the time it was like, boom. I started doing it too. I make it a point to tell everybody I meet they're awesome. And I talk to them and thank them for serving me and all that kind of stuff. People talk about how bad customer service is right now. My answer is, hey, why don't you try being a good customer first? Because the customer's not always right. No, seriously, I have watched this play out over and over and over again, that when I look at somebody and my wife looks at somebody, and whether they're serving me at a drive-thru or whatever that looks like, and I say, hey, thank you. I appreciate you. You're awesome. Have a good day. It's like 8 times out of 10, they blow up.
Especially when you call them by name.
Yeah, if you can call them by name, that's even better. Hey, thank you, Brad. Or I ask.
I love a name.
If somebody's got a different name that I'm not used to seeing, hey, tell me how you say your name. And I'll get them to tell me. And I'll say, well, let me tell you why I asked. My last name is Baumgarten. Everybody butchers that. So I like to ask so I understand what your name is. I can say it to you correctly. And they're like, wow, that's really nice. Thank you. That's how we show the love of Jesus. I think that I'm glad we have programs and all that kind of stuff. But she taught me that it's in my sphere of influence where I'm at. I've never made a big deal at work. We have a lot of catered lunches and stuff because we have all these classes. I never make a big deal about what food is served. I always just politely, sooner or later, our admin assistant who handles all the meals comes up. Tim, I noticed you only got the salad today. Why? I don't eat pork. Really? Why? And I explain. And then I shut up. I just tell why I feel this way, and then I shut up. You know what happens? She stops ordering pork dishes. They almost never order pork dishes now. I didn't say a word. All I did was just do what I do. And I did it quietly. And I'm trying to live it, not talk about it. I'm trying to live it. I'm trying to be a good person that somebody can trust and all that. And inevitably, somebody wanders into my office and they start talking to me about religious stuff because they know I'm really active in my church and all that. Just funny how that works out, isn't it? And I never had to go around and preach at anybody or anything. So everybody's like, I took yesterday off to travel down here. Where are you going, Tim? I'm going down to speak at a church in Fort Myers. Oh, awesome. Is it live cast? We want to watch. No pressure, right? This is real. And I'm going to close with this. You don't ever know the impact you're going to have on somebody. I always tell this story of an old Jewish couple I met on an airplane from Washington, D.C. to Palm Beach. No, Fort Lauderdale Airport. Never knew who they were. I'm sure they're long dead now. But they were so sweet and so kind to me, I never forgot them. They changed my life in one airplane ride. See, I want to be that person. I want to be the person that made a difference somewhere for somebody. And we can dissect people in a lot of ways. This is only one that we've been doing today. But I want to encourage you to just start with understanding that I'm not like you, and you're not like me, and that's okay. Wherever you landed on that thing, I don't have to be right. I don't have to agree with you, and that's okay. I don't have to hate you. We don't have to live in the world where I don't agree with you, therefore I hate you, and I'm going to destroy you. Let's check out of that world. Let's stop condemning everything we see that's wrong and start showing people what's right. I want people to see what I stand for, not what I stand against. I want to reach people for Christ. That's my thing. I want every person that can possibly make it to heaven to go. That's all. It's that simple. And that's what all this is about. We've gone way long. I'll answer whatever questions you have. Go, sir. Mm-hmm.
When we say Jesus without the Christ, are we not acknowledging the title? It's like saying Captain Hook. Captain is the title. Are you saying Dr. Matthews or Dr. Jones? Doctor would be the title.
I think that the answer to that, and I'll defer to Pastor Travis on it, but my answer to that would be God said he was going to write his law on our heart. He knows what's in your heart. If I just talk about Jesus and in my heart I'm acknowledging him as Christ, I think God knows that. And I don't think that's disrespectful. I don't think it's a mechanical thing I need to do to satisfy him. That's the way it looks to me. It may look different to you. And if it does, okay. I don't have any objection to that thinking, not at all. If you ask me, that's the way it looks to me from where I'm standing today. Pastor, you have anything to add to that?
Is there a mic?
Yes.
Yeah. I I mean, I would agree with you say. I mean, it is everybody. I can remember when I first started pastoring, I had an elder that required that I refer to him as Dr. Anderson, because he felt it was disrespectful for me to call him by his first name. That was very uncomfortable for me because I felt like in the church we're not about titles, we're about brothers and sisters, and that tends to be how I am, in most of my churches. We talk to each other with our first names. But I think in certain situations, like when I'm being introduced, the titles are nice because they show respect, and there's a certain level of. So I do think it depends on the circumstance, and
what the intent
in
is.
formal scenarios, the titles, are important, and in a world where there's many Jesuses, then you'd want to differentiate between just Jesus and Jesus Christ. Jesus of Nazareth was a term used in the Bible quite a bit, but I think we don't live in that world. I mean, in the English culture, we don't name our kids Jesus. So now I know in the Hispanic culture that's not the case, so it's different. So maybe in the Hispanic culture it would be important to differentiate that you're talking about which Jesus you're referring to. I don't know. I don't live in that culture. It's a long answer, but it goes back to culture, I think, and circumstance.
Yeah, and I think I think the Holy Spirit convicts people differently of different things in different circumstances.
My point is, wouldn't Christ come before Jesus? Because Christ is the title.
Oh, well, that's a language thing too.
Yeah.
Certain languages put it in different order. Yeah. Some languages put the title after instead of before, like the syntax of certain.
And then when you're saying Jesus, you're speaking of the man,
Mm-hmm.
not the actual.
But Jesus was a man. He came to earth and was a human. Yeah, we're getting off track. Love to have the discussion. I want to dismiss these folks because they've been real patient, and we've gone way longer than I intended this to go. But I appreciate the great conversation and the reason why we went so long. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. And y'all have a wonderful Sabbath the rest of the day. Can we close in prayer? Heavenly Father, thank you for this time together. Thank you for this discussion together and how we can best figure out how to best serve you and how to serve our fellow man, how to reach people for Jesus Christ. Lord, thank you for this opportunity. Ask for special blessings on each of these people that have been here today. Thank you. We pray in your name. Amen. Thank you.